Notes on the Seagull, 1896. In 1896, the Seagull was a complete failure at the Alexandrine Theater in St. Petersburg, but at the Moscow Art Theater in 1898, it was a tremendous success. The first exposition, talk between two minor characters, the girl Masha and the village teacher Medvedinko, is thoroughly permeated by the manner and mood of the two. We learn about them and about the two major characters, the budding actress Nina Zarechny and the poet Treplev, who are arranging some amateur theatricals in the alley of the park. Quote, "They are in love with each other, and tonight their souls will unite in an effort to express one and the same artistic vision." Says the teacher in the ornate style so typical of a Russian semi-intellectual. He has his reasons to allude to this being in love too. Nevertheless, we must admit that this introduction is decidedly blunt. Chekhov, like Ibsen, was always eager to get done with the business of explaining as quickly as possible. Sorin, the flabby and good-natured landowner, drops by with Treplev, his nephew, who is nervous about the play he is staging. The workmen who have built the platform come and say, "We are going for a dip," and meanwhile old Sorin has asked Masha to tell her father, who is his own employee on the estate, to have the dog kept quiet all night. "Tell him yourself," she says, rebuffing him. The perfectly natural swing in the play, the association of odd little details which at the same time are perfectly true to life, is where Chekhov's genius is disclosed. In the second exposition, Treplev talks to his uncle about his mother, the professional actress who is jealous of the young lady who is going to act in his play. Nor can one even mention deuce in her presence. "My goodness, just try," exclaims Treplev. With another author, the complete picture of the woman in this expository dialogue would be a dreadful piece of traditional technique, especially seeing that it is to her own brother that the young man is speaking, but by sheer force of talent, Chekhov manages to pull it through. The details are also amusing. She has $70,000 in the bank, but if you ask her for a loan, she starts crying. Then he speaks of the routine theater, of its smug household morals, and of the new thing he wants to create. And he talks about himself, about his sense of inferiority because his mother is always surrounded by famous artists and writers. It is quite a long monologue. By a judiciously placed question, he is further made to speak of Trigorin, his mother's friend, the author. Charm, talent, but somehow after Tolstoy and Zola, one does not want to read Trigorin. Note the placing of Tolstoy and Zola on one level. Typical for a young author like Treplev in those days, the late 90s. Nina appears. She was afraid her father, a neighboring squire, would not let her come. Sorin goes to call the household, for the moon is rising and it is time to start Treplev's play. Note two typical Chekhov moves. First, Sorin sings a few bars of a Schubert song, then checks himself and tells with a laugh the nasty things somebody once said about his singing voice. Second, then when Nina and Treplev are left alone, they kiss, and immediately after she asks, "What's that tree there?" The answer, an elm. "Why is the tree so dark?" she goes on. These trifles disclose better than anything invented before Chekhov the wistful helplessness of human beings, the old man who made a mess of his life, the delicate girl who will never be happy. The workmen come back. It is time to begin. Nina refers to her stage fright emotion. She will have to be acting in front of Trigorin, the author of those wonderful short stories. "Dunno, haven't read them," Treplev says curtly. It has been pointed out by critics who like noting such things that while the elderly actress Arkadina is jealous of the amateur Nina, who as yet is only dreaming of a stage career, her son, the unsuccessful and not very gifted young writer, is jealous of a really fine writer. Trigorin, incidentally, a kind of double of Chekhov, the professional himself. Excuse me. Let me reread that. It has been pointed out by critics who like noting such things that while the elderly actress Arkadina is jealous of the amateur Nina, who as yet is only dreaming of a stage career, her son, the unsuccessful and not very gifted young writer, is jealous of a really fine writer, Trigorin. incidentally a kind of double of Chekhov, the professional himself. The audience arrives. First Dorn, the old doctor, and the wife of Shamraev, the manager of Soren's estate, who is an old flame of Dorn. Then Arkadina, Soren, Trigorin, Masha, and Medvedinko flock in. Shamraev asks Arkadina about an old comic he used to applaud. "You keep asking me about antediluvian nobodies," she replies, rather testily. Presently, the curtain rises. There is a real moon and a view of the lake instead of a backdrop. Nina, sitting on a stone, makes a lyrical speech in a Maeterlinck style, mystically commonplace, obscurely trite. "It is something in the decadent manner," whispers Arkadina. "Mother," says her son in pleading tones. Nina goes on. The idea is that she is a spirit talking after all life has ceased on earth. The red eyes of the devil appear. Arkadina makes fun of it, and Treplev loses his temper, shouts for the curtain, and goes away. The others rebuke her for having hurt her son, but she feels insulted herself. "That bad-tempered, vain boy wants to teach me what the theater ought to be." The subtle point is that though Treplev has a real desire to destroy the old forms of art, he has not the talent to invent new ones to take their place. Note what Chekhov does here. What other author would have dared to make his main character a positive character, as they say, that is, one which is expected to win the audience's sympathy? Who else would have dared to make him a minor poet, at the same time giving real talent to the least pleasant persons of the play, to the nasty, self-sufficient actress and the egotistical, supercritical, emphatically professional writer? Some singing is heard on the lake. Arkadina recalls the days when youth and gaiety filled the place. She regrets having hurt her son. Nina appears, and Arkadina introduces her to Trigorin. "Oh, I always read you." Now comes a delightful little parody of Chekhov's own method of contrast between poetry and prose. "Yes, the setting was beautiful," says Trigorin, and adds after a pause, "That lake must be full of fish." And Nina is puzzled to learn that a man who, as she says, has experienced the delights of creative work can be amused by angling. Without any special connection, again a typical device with Chekhov and beautifully true to life, but evidently continuing the line of thought of his previous conversation, Shamraev recalls a certain funny incident in a theater years ago. There is a pause after this when the joke falls flat and nobody laughs. Presently, they disperse, with Soren complaining without effect to Shamraev about the dog barking at night, Shamraev repeating an earlier anecdote about a church singer, and Medvedinko, the socialist-minded, needy village teacher, inquiring how much such a singer earns. The fact that the question is unanswered shocked many critics who required facts and figures from plays. I answered, "I remember reading somewhere the solemn statement that a playwright must tell his audience quite clearly the income of his respective characters, for otherwise their moods and action cannot be understood in full. But Chekhov, the genius of the casual, attains in the harmonious interplay of these trivial remarks much greater heights than the ordinary slaves of cause and effect." Dorn tells Treplev, who now appears again, that he liked his play or what he heard of the play. He goes on expounding his own views about life, ideas, and art. Treplev, who was at first touched by his praise, now interrupts him twice. "Where is Nina?" He rushes away almost in tears. "Oh, youth, youth," sighs the doctor, and Masha retorts. When people can't find anything else to say, they say, "Oh, youth, youth." She takes a pinch of snuff, to the vast disgust of Dorn. Then she becomes suddenly hysterical and tells him she is desperately and hopelessly in love with Treplev. "Everybody is so nervous," the doctor repeats. "So very nervous, and everybody is in love, this magic lake. But how can I help you, my poor child? How?" So ends the first act, and we may well understand that the average audience in Chekhov's time, as well as the critics, those priests of the average, were left rather irritated and puzzled. There has been no definite line of conflict, or rather there have been several vague lines and a futility of conflict, for one cannot expect any special conflict from a quarrel between a quick-tempered but soft son and a quick-tempered but equally soft mother, each always regretting his or her hasty words. Nothing special further is suggested by Nina meeting Trigorin, and the romances of the other characters are blind alleys. Finishing the act with an obvious dead end seemed an insult to people eager for a good tussle. But notwithstanding the fact that Chekhov was still tied up by the very traditions he was flaunting, the rather flat expositions for existence, what seemed nonsense and false to the average critic are really the grain from which someday a really great drama will grow. For with all my fondness for Chekhov, I cannot hide the fact that in spite of his authentic genius, he did not create the perfect masterpiece. His achievement was that he showed the right way to escape the dungeon of deterministic causation, of cause and effect, and burst the bars holding the art of drama captive. What I hope of future playwrights is not that they will merely repeat the actual methods of Chekhov, for these belong to him, to his type of genius, and cannot be imitated, but that other methods tending with even more power to the same freedom of drama will be found and applied. This said, let us turn to the next act and see what surprises it reserved for an irritated and puzzled audience.